Good afternoon, everybody, and I'm going to assume that a lot of you here already have got a pretty good knowledge about games. So I work for IGEA. We're the trade association for video games in Australia and New Zealand. So we predominantly represent publishers, distributors, and now creators of video games in Australia. There's lots of great Australian developers making some great product out there, and it's an honour to actually represent them. We're predominantly an advocacy organisation, but we're also here to educate, and we're always looking for opportunities to inform the media and government about the games industry itself and who's actually playing games. So, because it continues to be a surprise to people. So, you know, the bulk of people think that's the average Australian gamer. A little boy sitting in his bedroom, shooting up goodness knows what. Or it's a very blurry side. So, but you know, that's not the average Australian gamer. This is the average Australian gamer. You know, they look like you. There's lots of families there. There's lots of cross-generational play. There's lots of women playing games. Who knew, right? Who knew? But this is still a surprise to people. Every 2 years, we produce a report that looks at the consumption of games. So who's playing games in Australia, why they play games, how they play games, what are the general attitudes towards games? Because it's safe to say games is sometimes treated very differently to any other form of media for whatever reason. It's not really a new media, but we still get a lot more scrutiny than a lot of other sectors. We've been producing these reports now for 18 years, the Digital Australia series, and we partner with Bond University to do the reports. And again, it's all about busting myths of who plays games. The data I'm showing you today is nearly 2 years old, but please don't panic, it hasn't changed that much. We're about to launch our new report the week after next, and I'm really pleased to report that the statistics basically move up in line with the population. So more on that later. So who plays games? 17 million Australians play games. It's a lot of people playing games, so 2/3 of the population. We always look at the gender identity, and this always blows people's minds. It probably doesn't blow your mind, but that nearly half the audience is female. So when we last did this study, and this was just off the back of COVID, 46% of the audience was female, 53% male. We started doing this survey back in 2005. And when we started the survey, 38% of the playing audience was female. So you can see how it's, you know, it's basically just moved in line with the population. So, you know, back to that slide where everyone games, it mirrors that exactly when we talk about gender. The other stat that fascinates people is age. So the average age of people who plays games in Australia is 35. It's not that little boy, it's not 8-year-olds, it's 35 years old. As I said, we started this study back in 2005, and when we started the study, the average age of a gamer was 24. So during the course of this period, it's 35. It's moving with the population. You know, people have been playing games on average 12, 13, 14 years in Australia. It's no surprise that you're seeing their age increase as well. What is interesting is when we start to look into age categories. So we've got two charts there. The one on the left is a proportion of all players. Now, for me, the fascinating statistic there is we still think games are for kids. Only 22% of the audience, or all players, are actually under 18, okay? So 78% of the audience is adult. Within that, 2/3 are working age, so 18 to 64, and 11% of 65-year-old and plus make up the total player audience. We also start to look at the proportion of players within each age group. So there might be less players under 18, but they're playing a lot. 78% of them are playing video games. Working age is still at about that 2/3, 68% are playing video games. And the most mind-blowing one, which gets all of the headlines, is 42% of people aged 65 and above are playing video games. And you know, we can all guess what they're playing, and we can all guess what sort of devices they're playing on, but that's quite a high statistic that genuinely shocks people every time we show that. This just looks a little bit more at the percentages within player age groups. So you can see basically between 5 and the age of 44, over 70% of people are playing video games. Okay. We look at how many Australian households have got devices for playing video games. Now, we all know smartphones are a gaming device, but some people don't recognise that. So back when we started the study, 76% of households had one device for playing games. We're up to 92% of households now have a video game device. Actually, 64% of households have got 2 or more devices, which is also no surprise. In terms of what Australians like to play on, consoles. Consoles came in at number 1. This was a first for this study. It's typically been PC. It does surprise me that phones aren't the number 1, but they're not. They're the number 2. And they also edged out PC for the first time since we did this study. We're also starting to see people transition into the subscription services as well, and we had a quick chat on cloud gaming and all that sort of stuff, so I think it's fair to say you'll expect to see some growth in that. Also, as this study was taken, like everything, there was a few supply issues with consoles, but, all the major console manufacturers have been around for a very long time with their 3rd, 4th, 5th iteration, and people hang on to them, it would seem. What's also interesting is how much time people are spending playing games. So it's actually quite moderate. So, if you read some of the headlines, you'd believe that everybody's playing games 14 hours a day. Not the case. The average player is about 83 minutes a day. So it's quite an important and significant part of their entertainment time. Kids, a little bit higher, 105 minutes, but we also know they don't watch television like I did as a kid. So the other thing is it's a little bit different across gender, which you'd also expect. So you see men spending a little bit more time, 94 minutes, women 70 minutes. Gamers are defined generally as a casual gamer or an in-depth player. So those that are playing casually typically have 2 10-minute sessions a day. Okay? Those that are into a more in-depth, involved experience, about an hour a day, which is pretty moderate when you consider it. Those who are retired, about an hour a day, and working age adults a little bit higher, 82 minutes. So it's sort of no surprise what they're doing on their commute or what they do when they come home. It's always important, I think, to think about why people are playing and it's ultimately to have fun. This was the first time in this study to have fun was the number 1 reasons people in all age groups played. We used to see the older demographic talk about they'd be playing games to keep their mind active, but it's since moved into they're just having fun, which is great. People also play to keep their mind active. They play to de-stress. We read that a lot, lots of escapism. They do it to pass time, and a lot of them just simply want to be challenged. So it doesn't vary that greatly across age, which is surprising. Like it has started to all become similar. Within the reports, and we can send you a link to the reports, we've got these just key infographics. On the left, I've touched on a lot of that, but a lot of people are using games to communicate. This is particularly relevant in a post-COVID or during a COVID world. So there's a couple of statistics there that we love to talk about. 75% of people play games socially. They don't play by themselves. That's another myth. Most people think it's just, the lone soldier playing a game by themselves. The bulk are playing socially. People are communicating through games. Parents are playing games with children. They use that as a really important way to connect with their families. A nice little stat, I think, is that 36% of people have made a friend playing a game, and I think that's a lovely statistic. Some really good games events in the country, and if you ever go down to PAX, you see that. They've all been playing online forever, and they come together at games conventions to actually catch up in real life, which I think is a great story. This is a bit of it's hard to read this slide, but again, we talk about there's a big culture around games. People go to games events, people attend events in games, as you'd all be aware, but people engage with games differently. What we're starting to see is a lot of creation happening in games as well, and our next study looks at that in a little bit more depth. You know, games like your Roblox and things like that, they're kind of a game, they're kind of a platform. Kids are making games, all of a sudden they're a games developer. There's some really interesting stuff starting to happen. People make their own content as well. You know, they spend a lot of time researching how to play games and that type of thing, which is also really interesting. 60% are using them in the classroom. So that might be Mathletics or Reading Eggs, or it might be Assassin's Creed and they're learning about history. So they're quite well used in the classroom. Well, that's what they tell Mum, but yeah, there is education versions. And Minecraft's a classic one that's often used in the classroom. Just sort of going on to the purchasing power of games. So we also release a study every year that just looks at annual sales, and we've got two sources that we use to collect sales. But 2022, over $4.2 billion was spent on video games in Australia, and that includes hardware. It was actually up 5% on 2021, and Australians are operating differently to the rest of the world. The rest of the world started having a few little declines, not so much here. What's really interesting is the different categories, and all the categories experience growth. So the biggest category in terms of dollars is mobile games, $1.56 billion last year, and it was up 3% on the previous year. The digital space, so that includes full games, it includes microtransactions, so that's what you spend in-game, and subscriptions also increased, and that was up 6%. The big growth in that area really came from the subscriptions, so it's the things like your Xbox Game Pass and that are really sticking now, and the microtransactions as well. So, you know, there's a lot of games that, you know, are released and they're still going 4 years later because of that microtransaction piece. So, you know, we see the sales data. I'm sure every Australian has 7 copies of Grand Theft Auto. Like, that's always at the top of the games charts, which is interesting. You know, everyone was predicting the death of traditional retail. It's not happening here in Australia. Last year was actually up 7%. So when we say traditional retail, that's your bricks and mortar retail, you know, like your EB Games, your JB Hi-Fi, plus their digital storefronts as well, but they actually sell like full box games, as we call them. Like that's what we used to sell in the olden days, and peripherals and things like that. So hardware is still doing incredibly well, and hardware started to come back into supply last year. So I'm talking PlayStation 5, the Xbox Series X, Nintendo Switch. They all had uplifts in sales. New games. We had a lot of new games come onto the market, and they performed really well as well. So what we're sort of seeing is some of those bigger titles are getting bigger year on year on year. So back catalogue's still a really important part of the industry, but some of those new games are doing really well. And peripherals are just, you know, headsets and that sort of thing. So, you know, Australians love to play games and buy games, as we say. We saw some of our data from Newzoo as well, so they're sort of, I guess, the go-to people when we talk about forecasting. And they're saying, in terms of a CAGR, the global games market is due to grow 6.6% up until 2005. They're already saying Australia's going to be 0.3 above that. So, you know, up 6.9%. So that upward lift in games is certainly here to stay. And I'm sure PwC release their Outlook report soon, and that will predict exactly the same thing. There's lots of different storefronts where you can go and purchase games, and Newzoo also offer, you know, the players per ecosystem, which I thought some of you might find interesting as well. So, and each of these storefronts is experiencing an increase. So the dominant in Australia is Apple App Store. And what's interesting, we've got a lot of Australian game developers making games for that platform as well, and they're doing really well. We're indexing way above that. PlayStation, Epic Game Store. Epic is Fortnite and Rocket League. They're probably the two names you know the most. The Android app stores, Nintendo, Xbox and Steam. So Steam is predominantly PC. So they've all got a significant amount of players, and each has experienced growth since 2020. Another interesting thing is, you know, you touched on genres before. Again, the perception is it's all shooter. It's not all shooter. Adventure games are really popular here. Puzzle games, and that's reflective in age as well of who's actually playing. Battle Royale is like your Fortnite style game. Shooter and role playing. So, you know, everybody plays games. There's a wealth of genres. They're pretty big genres, some of those, but you can just see there's quite a wide variety there of games available and games popularity. This is just a little plug. Our next version of research actually launches in Australia on the 8th of August, and we're not calling it Digital Australia anymore, we're just calling it Australia Plays. So if you're welcome to come, our details are on our website, or see me after, we can make sure that you can see it. Like I said, the statistics aren't different, they're all heading north, which I think is really great, and we're also looking a little more at what people are doing in-game as well. So that's my talk done today, so thank you.